Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Triple Zoom, Triple 20 Zoom. We're going to have 20 minutes hearing from Bianca and Kenny, and then we've got 20 minutes where we can ask some questions and follow up from things that they're going to be sharing. If you want to just drop those questions in the comments, you can send them straight to V61 Church, and then in 15-20 minutes we'll have a time of Q&A, and then after that we're going to have some discussion and activations, and it'd be wonderful for everyone to grace us with your face while we're on Zoom. It'd be fantastic to be part of this together, and as we hear and listen and share. But let me pray now. I'm going to hand straight over to Kenny and Bianca. So Jesus, I just thank you for this time. I thank you that we get to go dig in a bit deeper into conversations, and Father, I pray for this hour, just that it'll be full of you and your wisdom, and for us to provide a space to enable us to carry on the conversations about things going on in this world. Bless us, we pray. Amen. Amen. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Steve. Evening, everyone. Good to be here. Thanks for having us tonight. So I think we're going to tag team. So I'll take 10 minutes, and Bianca take 10, or I might take less, or whatever, if that's all right.
It's going to take 15 and I'll take 5.
Probably not, given that I've only got a few slides. But yeah, really good to see everyone. Probably a good place to start was I managed to catch some of, well, probably all of Alex's session a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that was really good to sort of watch. Great to hear. I just want to say, I don't think they were on the call, but thanks for the comments from, I think it was Tabitha, Adora, Dami, and Ryan, I think, made a comment, and Ryan actually made a really good comment about the politics, and I don't know if Ryan's listening, or I guess he might listen to this. I thought it was a really good point, and if you weren't on the call, he was essentially saying that he was at Bethel, and there was an announcement around Bethel aligning to the Republican Party, and then he mentioned coming to the UK and being part of the church that was aligning to more sort of socialist principles, which also caused a schism. And so, Ryan, if you're listening, mate, I just wanted to say I definitely resonate with what you're articulating there as, you know, a concern that we have when we begin to think about politics in this conversation and in the church. And before I share a little bit about kind of what was on my heart around the topic of inclusivity, I guess I'm in touch with a range of feelings at the moment. Probably one of them being opinion fatigue. I think there's just lots of opinions out there that everybody's got one. They're a bit like noses, right? They say everyone's got a nose, everyone's got an opinion. And I've recently tried to sort of lock myself off Twitter and things like that a little bit, just because the deluge has been a bit overwhelming. So again, nothing in that apart from me just sort of sharing. I've been in touch with that opinion fatigue. I've also been in touch with a sense of my own ignorance on this topic. You know, I mean, I know we're here sharing, but there's a lot that I don't know. So certainly I will be sharing from a place of humility, if you like. Not that we'd expect anything different. And then also in touch with a sense of hopelessness. And that might seem like a strange thing to say, because we know that Jesus is the ultimate hope, and clearly that's true. But that notwithstanding, I'm in touch with a sense of, wow, what is the answer to all of this, God? What really is the way forward? So I just wanted to sort of position that and say, you know, we're thinking about, you know, what could we do here together in a way that anyone watching either now or in a few months' time, or even a few years' time, may feel like the 60 minutes were 60 minutes really well used. You know, what can we do here such that we can be helpful? And I think that's just the framing of the conversation, really. We want to try and be helpful when we talk about inclusivity. So, kind of intro over, I did have a couple of slides, and I was thinking about the question of inclusivity altogether. You know, what what are we even talking about? And some of you may have seen this. So if you have, I'm going to share my screen. But if you have seen it, then I'm going to ask you not to give the answer away so quickly. Let me present this. Nope, I don't want to share. I want to present. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to give you a chance to read this sort of problem scenario on your own, then I'll sort of speak to it. All right, so what do we think is going on there? So father and son were killed in a car accident. The father was killed, the son was injured, you know, and the father was pronounced dead. The son then gets wheeled into a hospital emergency room. Surgeon comes and says, oh my God, it's my son. What do we think is going on there? You can either put it in the chat or take yourself off mute and share. Don't all rush at once now. Let's see if there's anything in the chat. Nothing in the chat. Okay, so some people, you might be a bit reluctant to have a go at that, but I'm going to give you one more chance. Have a read again, and this time read a bit slower, and see if you can come up with anything.
I've come off mute, I think.
Ah, Karen, yes. Yeah, there you are.
Hi.
Karen.
Hi.
It's so lovely to see your faces. It really is just so sweet to see you. Can I say what I think?
Yes, please.
Is the surgeon his mother?
Yeah, bingo. You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get
Well done,
that.
Karen. Yeah, precisely. And you know, what's the point of sharing the story? Well, it's just around the subtle ways in which we may overlook people, or our biases can creep in. So we automatically assume that a surgeon is going to be a man and not be a woman. Now, the critical thinkers and analysts of you might say, well, I've primed you by using the word father quite a lot, and therefore you just assumed. But we probably all know from just everyday life that there are tiny ways in which we subtly just make assumptions that really speak to the biases that we all have, you know, just sort of wired in. So I thought that was just an example of what we're talking about when we talk about kind of inclusivity. We're talking about doing what we can to challenge those biases that we might have. And a good definition that I've quite liked is, you know, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. And in my role, I'm head of leadership development at a company, but I also oversee our diversity inclusion strategy. And one of the kind of examples that I gave the company for what we're talking about is diversity is a bit like inviting people to a party. So you say, everyone come to the party, everyone's welcome. But inclusion is more like you come to the party and we've got specific, you know, you've got access to the party. So there's nothing denying you to be able to access or dance or sing or whatever. But not only that, when we give you access, you can dance in a way that you feel like no one's watching. You feel like you belong. You feel like you're part of it. And you can just dance your heart away because you feel like a sense of home. And I think that's, for me at least, a useful distinction between when we talk about diversity and when we talk about inclusive practices. And so I've mentioned earlier that I think the church has, you know, we have a great starting point, a great reference point. So when you think about Matthew 28, which I haven't got here, right, which is, you know, go into the world and make all disciples of all nations, the Great Commission. And then Mark 11, where Jesus goes into the temple and says, you know, my house would be a house of prayer for many nations, and you've made it into a den of thieves. Yes, he's speaking more kind of eschatologically, speaking into, I think it was from Jeremiah, the prophecy about what we know is coming, but we know God's intent and we know God's heart. So we know that actually the church is in many ways ought to be illuminating the thinking in the world when it comes to these issues. And then Act 6 is when, and I think I might have mentioned it on one of the other calls, but Act 6 is when Luke is telling the story of how some of the Greek widows, the Hellenist widows, were being overlooked in the giving out of rations and food. And so they made a complaint and said, look, our widows are being overlooked. And so the disciples said, it's not good that we should leave where we are, but let's pray for and choose men filled of spirit and wisdom to make the right decisions. So that was an issue around inclusivity. So I guess I just wanted to root our conversation in as a gentle reminder that we have a good heritage. We have a great heritage in the church in many ways, despite what we know has happened in recent years. I think this is a good starting point. And then just to land and kind of hand over to Bianca, I was thinking about, you know, is there anything that I need to confess? Is there anything that I need to, you know, seek forgiveness on? And because when we talk about inclusivity, you know, we're talking about being able to break our cliques and get to know people that we might not normally get to know. Bianca's looking at time, so she's giving me, oh, she's not, okay, I thought she was giving me I thought it was a subtle signal. I was trying to pay attention to the subtleties, but I will press on. I was thinking about, you know, in terms of how can we be useful in this conversation, Lord, what's on my heart around people that don't look like me? What am I potentially holding? And one thing that came to me was that I recognized whenever I go past or drive or walk past really posh houses, I always feel a little bit awkward, or I feel a bit funny. And I recognize that there are two sources of that. One, I feel the pain of what I didn't have when I was growing up. So I grew up on a council estate in Brixton Hill. And I'll never forget us not having water, me having to walk to the front of the road with a bucket and to put the water in the bucket and seeing all people on the bus sort of watching me, feeling really embarrassed. The second thing I feel when I'm walking past these kinds of homes is envy as well. I feel envious. And I say all that to say, when I speak to my white friends who happen to be middle class, I can feel a kind of a subtle frustration that they seem to have access to a privilege. They seem to have access to things that I didn't have, or, you know, it might be hand-me-downs. You know, a friend of mine who's white has said, oh, my grandparents just gave me 50 grand to invest in a home. And I'm like, oh, wow, praise God for you. That is so amazing. I'm like, Lord, what about, you know, so I don't want anyone listening to this to feel bad because their grandparents have given them, you know, that is amazing. That is a blessing. I'm just being honest around this question of how do we feel about people that don't look like us? And can we be honest to create a space to just sort of share and dialogue? And I'm just sharing that. That's perhaps something, not perhaps, certainly something that God's still working in my own heart around the envy, the feeling of frustration, feeling like, well, you've come into this world with a leg up and I haven't. I think that then the last thing I feel is I think I've grown up with a strong sense of class in a way. By that I mean, when I've grown up and worked with white colleagues, I've often got a sense that, you know, doing things proper is really important, particularly in the UK. There's something about propriety and speaking properly and articulating yourself properly and all of that. And I think I've grown up with a little bit of either a hang up over that or a frustration around that. And perhaps not seeing my white friends and my colleagues in the best of light because I've maybe held that attitude against them. So I'm gonna sort of pause there, but those are some of the thoughts that are kind of on my heart and on my mind at the moment.
Awesome.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna look at my very few notes. I kind of a shoot from the hip communicator, so I've got a few lines. I love this. I love that we're doing this. Even though we're online, it's not social media. And I think that it's important in this time to try and have real world conversations. You know, there's so much happening in front of audiences of hundreds and thousands of people. And I think that it's hard for anything deep to happen inside of people outside of doing that in relationship and, looking people in the face and let's have these conversations, let's do this. So I think that this is really important, and I think it's really important to spend more time in the real world when we're talking about very tough issues, and when we're really trying to make some sort of change. It has to be something that happens in our actual lives. Because it's like this pseudo thing that's happening where it's like all of these opinions are happening and people are formulating opinions and making changes based on other people's conversations and statements that they're making on social media. I just think there's something a little bit odd about that. And I think like taking action in the real world and having those conversations in the real world is really important. I just had a few thoughts about it, and it goes on from this real world thought that I had, and I've been reminded very much in this season of not allowing necessarily the outside opinions to affect my real relationships. And I'm seeing relationships between friends of different races breaking down because maybe a Black person has, this whole issue of racial inequality has arisen, and then that's affected their relationships with people that they knew, like they have relationships with somebody that's white or another race, and now they're letting someone's outside opinion affect that relationship as if they didn't know that person. And I've had to guard myself from allowing all of the tensions and the pain and other people's experiences, and to guard from that affecting relationships I have with actual people, because I know you. I'm like, I know you. I know that you might have, done something that someone else says is not quite right or racist, but I know you, and I know that that's not you, and I didn't take it that way in the moment. So it's really having to remember that, to not allow situations to affect my real world relationships. And I think that's really important for all of us. And I think it's probably more important for me as a Black person to do that, because there's so much coming in to change like the way that you see things, that I have to remember how I do actually see things, or how I saw things. I hope that makes sense. And another thing that I think is really important is this question of how do we fight for equality and inclusion without taking offence. I think that's a question for us, especially as Christians, because I was actually reading in Proverbs, trying to go back to that practice of reading a proverb a day, and then I was reading Proverbs 19, and 19:11, and it said, "Good sense makes a man restrain his anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression and an offence." And I feel like that's really interesting, because I feel like in the season that we're living in, like, to take offence is like the right thing to do. You must be offended because, we have to stand up for our rights. And actually, how do we fight for racial, for any kind of inclusion and diversity? How do we hold that banner up but then not be offended? Like, I think that's a question that I ask God, and I'm asking, even in this space. It might be something for us to even talk about later, like, how do we do that? How do we actually do that? And I think a part of it is allowing, as Kenny said in the talk that Sunday a few weeks ago, being open to all kinds of conversations that might be offensive to us, but if it's shared respectfully and with honour, then actually allowing a different perspective to enter the space and us to talk about that. I think there's something around that, us being have enough humility and to leave our offence at the door, or our ability to be offended at the door, and say, okay, I'm going to hear things that I don't like, but we're going to honour each other in how we're saying it, even if what we're going to say may feel egregious. So I think there's something around that too. And going on from that, I think as a people, I think inclusion is, there's a depth to the inclusion when we feel known. And I think when we shared in that Sunday, just the very act of sharing, I felt more known in V61 than I've ever felt. And I didn't actually have a two-way conversation. It was that I was able to share very honestly And to be honest, for the first time, I felt like this is my home, these are my peoples. Do you know what I mean? And it's just because I was able to share a piece of myself, and in the truest way I could. So I think there's something around, if we're going to be inclusive and we're going to try and be more one, I think being more known is a part of that. And how do we work towards being more known as a people and as a community? Because it goes back to that scripture, to John 13:35, and I think ultimately that's what it's all about. It's from 34. It says, "So I give you now a new commandment: love each other just as much as I've loved you. For when you demonstrate the same love I have for you by loving one another, everyone will know that you are my true followers." And I think that's the ultimate mandate, that as Christians, as we try to fight for inclusion and equality, ultimately we're also trying to exemplify the love of God so that people can see our love. And it's not necessarily just to end with diversity and inclusion, but it's actually to point people to Jesus. So as we learn to love each other and as we learn to know each other, it's not just about that kumbaya moment. It's actually, people will then be pointed to Jesus and have that connection. So that was my last point.
Yeah, so I guess we've got about a minute left, and maybe it's just worth kind of pulling together what we shared. First of all, thanks again just for listening so intently, and for inviting us both. You know, looking forward to the questions and further dialogue. I think maybe there's sort of three threads, Bianca's 2 points around, you know, what does it look like to sort of pursue justice and righteousness without carrying offense? How can we create spaces where people can feel like they can be known? And then the question I raised was, you know, is there anything any of us may need to confess in this kind of area, or ask for forgiveness for, or forgive? So just to sort of summarize, and then, yeah, thanks. I guess I hand over to Steve.
Fantastic, guys. Thank you. Thank you again for just sharing candidly and openly again. And there's definitely, I've got a whole bunch of questions to ask, and what we're going to do is over the next sort of 15 minutes, I guess, we're going to, if you have a question based on anything that Kenny and Bianca have talked about, do drop it in the comments, and then as we go through each question, we'll ask individuals to ask their question. If you could do it as succinctly as possible, that would just give some more space for that time to kind of listen and learn. Just while people are doing that, my first question really is, you mentioned about becoming unoffendable, or and just particularly in our culture, that it's very easy to get offended by like everything. Just tell us just some practical ways of how we wrestle with the culture now, but also biblical culture of like forgiveness and letting go, and have gentleness as our anchor. If you could just share on some of those, that'd be awesome.
I feel like you could answer that question really well. I know you're asking us and we are going to answer it, try to anyway, but you are a great example of that. Like, you are really great at just listening to all the things, and you're like, and I don't,
yeah,
sage like no.
So I feel like you probably got things to share at some point. If after we've shared, there's all the holes, you can fill them.
I mean, I don't know if I have a really good kind of answer on that. So, I mean, how do we become unoffendable? I think offense will always be there. And, you know, I think part of it probably starts with something like humility, some practicing some form of empathy, you know, asking ourselves the question, why am I really offended by that? You know, what really is going on there? Because usually there's some kind of second order offense going on. For example, you know, Bianca might say something and I get offended on the surface, but maybe what's really going on is my pride has been sort of you know, hurt a little bit, and there's some work for me to do there. But as I say, I don't have a fully formed answer, so happy to sort of give space for others if other people have got better answers there.
I also think that there's something around understanding that to take offence and then to hold offence will then build something in me that I don't want to have. So like for me, I feel like offence can be quite dangerous. So I hold it like this hot thing that I don't want to have. So will analyse it. I'll analyse, why do I feel this way? And there might be some valid reasons, but then I want to deal with it because I don't want like to poison the waters of my own heart. So I think viewing offence as something that can poison us if we keep it for too long might help that. And then it might open me up to, okay, I don't want to be offended by what you're saying. I'm going to keep that door because I don't want to hurt myself, but then I also want to listen with kind of fresh, unfiltered ears. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's almost a sense in which, like, holding, I had a similar kind of description of like this, but it's almost like holding on to offence. You know, we almost want to do harm to someone else by virtue of doing that. And it's a bit like holding on to offence is like slapping yourself in the face by expecting the other person to feel it. And you're only doing yourself harm when we hold on to offence. Clearly, there's more to it than that, because if it was just that simple, we would all never hold on to offence. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. What do you think, Steve, or others?
Let me open this up to others. People got any other thoughts or pearls to share for a couple of seconds? That'd be great.
I'm going to weigh in, aren't I? And really quickly, I just think when you're talking about something like this, it's taking it abundantly seriously. So it's taking the issue seriously, taking yourself completely unseriously. So, you know, it's not that your feelings don't matter, but it's the issue that matters. And when we're gathered together to talk about it, we're almost problem solving together. So it's about not taking ourselves too seriously. I think I've also heard people saying about having a tender heart, but about having the hind of a rhino. So having a tough skin, but a tender heart.
That's good.
If I might add something, Steve, I think part of it is also often is holding it in rather than having the conversation with offence. Like often like for whatever reason, I usually will hold on to offence if I feel like if I don't have the conversation with the person or whatever it was that offended me. And so I guess, I don't know, like, what does it look like to create an environment that feels safe for people to actually say? I was having a big discussion with Jockey today after church, and we're talking about making things uncomfortable by having the conversation kind of thing. Because there are times when I've been offended, but I'm like, well, I don't want to rock the boat or make people feel uncomfortable, or I don't want to sound like I'm constantly talking about this issue or whatever it is. It's like, will people run out of patience kind of thing, or will this get blown out of proportion kind of thing? And I think what I love about what's been happening, and I'm sorry I missed the first 20 minutes, Kenny and Bianca, but yeah, I think that's one thing that I think is helpful, is how do we create an environment and a culture where people can, because I think so much about offence grows toxic when it is not spoken about or dealt with. And sometimes, I know I'm a teacher as well, like there've been like weeks have gone by before a kid will say, oh, you were short with me, I thought you didn't like me. And it's like, oh, that is so not true. But like something like a short conversation could have been, I just was having a bad day. And yeah, you're probably right. Like I did snap at you, it wasn't cool. So I think, yeah, sometimes it might be just as simple as that, but other times it might be a bigger issue. But anyway, I think, I just think that the idea of like, how can we create safety in dialogue?
Right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much. We have just some phrases in our team, and just with Viv and I, just that we tried to not I think what Mark was saying, we try not to kind of dwell on stuff for a long period of time. Is that as a team, there's things that we're gonna work well at, and there's things that there's going to be conflict and clashes, and so we just try to do conflict really as quickly as possible, rather than dwelling on issues over a long period of time. So we have the kind of the three things, like if there's a reaction, do you just brush it off, like it's just like a fly, just brush off that offense? Or do you need to forgive? You know, biblically, do we need to forgive that person, or do we need to confront? And some of the times it's just, that's not a non-issue. Bit like you were saying, I need to think about why have I been reacted? Why have I reacted to that? A lot of the time we just need to forgive one another. And then if there are consistent issues, or actually this was what you said there, or what you did there was, let me just clarify what that was about. So we do a lot of kind of 5-minute, 10-minute chats, and just to try and resolve conflict with one another. Those would be my three, like brush it off, forgive, or confront.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder whether I might ask another question on the offence matter. Kenny, you said something about when people don't sound like you or don't look like you, and I obviously don't sound like the normal British person. I've been in this country for 15 years, and sometimes I still feel that I'm not. I feel this is my home, but I feel often because people hear my accent, they might think differently from me. I'm not a very eloquent speaker. So even when they hear my accent, sometimes some people would think I'm a little bit daft. And it's that matter of what you explained about diversity and inclusivity. And it's so good, because I come from a place of listening and I want to learn more. I also come from a place from South Africa, as you know, has got a real history. I also come from a place where I ran away from it. I wanted to come to a place where it's better. And I come to, 15 years later, I'm like, it's still not better, And then there's this people that does take offense, for example, and this might be offensive, I don't know, it's like Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter versus Lives Matter, and I don't know who's taking offense with what. And then I'm thinking, okay, I can go back to the Bible, like what you've guys done just now. I can go back to the word. I'm like, yes, Luke 15. He's going for the one, not, the 9 to 9 is still there. He's going for the one, but I'm still confused about this language that people use. A very small example is COVID at the moment, and it's been shown that BAME groups are more likely to have COVID and to get more serious symptoms of it, because I've marked white other, not white British or white Irish. I'm now part of the BAME group, and I'm like, what? So that's all those type of things that just confuses me. So I just really thank you so much for coming up today and just, bringing up your questions of confession and of real world relationships, because it just makes me listen more and give me the opportunity to ask the maybe offensive questions. And yeah, so just thank you. It wasn't really a question, I think, or maybe it was.
Okay. Well, thanks, Raylene, for just being so honest and vulnerable and sharing that. Yeah.
Okay, let me just. Elias has sent a question in, and so I just want to hand over to Elias, and he's got a question to ask you guys.
Hey guys.
Hey,
No,
Liz.
but my question was more education. As I think in what we need to learn, all of us, but also what we're going to transmit to our kids. Because, for example, I live in, I'm from Argentina, South America. We don't have black people, but the education that my parents gave me, and because I have the opportunity to travel a lot with my dad, and my dad has friends in the States, you know, I'm from different countries, and I was always educated to respect the other, you know, and then the possibility to be in a multicultural university, living there with people around the world. So my question is, which place education, which place has on this, and practically which can be like the main things that we can share with our kids and with the people that is around us now.
I mean, it sounds like your dad did a great job. So, you know, probably a lot of the things that your dad taught you are the things that we should be, you know, sharing with our children and the next generation. But what comes to me is what, you know, Martin Luther King said, you know, I want to be judged by the content of my character and not by the color of my skin. And so I think the generation that we have now, Gen Z? What is it?
I think it's Gen Z.
The guys
count,
that are
yeah.
just, you know, Chloe and them. So.
Not Chloe.
I'm a millennial, actually.
So, well, millennials is down. I feel like this is less of an issue. I think with
Gen Z are a nightmare.
they are.
Officially, you heard it here first.
But I feel like they have much more of a global perspective. So I don't think it's necessarily as difficult for them to get it. So I worry less with the generation that are coming up, to be honest with you. But I think if we love Jesus, then we teach them Jesus and all that he does and all that he is. And how do we imitate him? Who did he care for? Who did he care about? He cared about everybody, but he's also so much for the marginalized or the underdog, and just like instilling that heart we do with our girls, just to see the people that other people don't see, to love everybody for who they are. When my children do see somebody who, you know, we've watched things, and I make sure I show them somebody who might have a disability or something, and I'm at times I will watch them, I'll let them notice that and see, look how, you know, they're awesome, aren't they? And look how able they are, and you know, they are different, but so just to find those instances where you can allow our children to see people that are different, that might feel other, but how do we treat them as if they're not other? I think we just take the opportunities as they come up, to be honest with you.
That's great, thank you. So we're going to hand over to a millennial. Chloe's got a question, and I wouldn't mind we've got like 2 or 3 minutes left before we're going to transition. So over to you, Chloe.
Cool. Can I just say something really quickly about offence? Yeah. There's just been swirling around my mind that anyway, so just that I think there's like 2 like things. One is like legitimate offence, and the other is like being offended by things that actually you shouldn't be offended by. And I guess the legitimate offence is more like hurt, and that's real, and that's like worthy of processing. But I think sometimes in this situation, for example, as a white person, I might be offended by lots of black people suddenly feeling free to talk about how my inadvertent behaviour has hurt them. And I don't really think there's a place for offence there, because I am in the position where I have not been hurt by those behaviours. And I still might feel offended, and I'm not saying we just ignore our feelings, but I guess I just think it's not the same as processing legitimate hurt where someone's done something against you. The freedom of another individual being offensive to me is my problem that I have to work through, rather than like actually being hurt deliberately by someone. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's just been helpful for me when things have come up. I go, this isn't really right for me to be offended by this, and actually it's right for me to feel the hurt of my friends and see where they're coming from and see where I might be actually the perpetrator of a problem rather than a victim, if that makes sense.
That's so good.
Sorry,
go ahead. I'll wait.
No, it's fine. My question's a bit off a different tangent, so I don't know if I don't know if it's right to ask it.
Oh, ask it.
No, go ahead, and I'll come back to that one.
Well, it was more to do with church, and I wanted to ask Alexander last time, but I didn't get around to it. But I wondered just really for what you guys thought. What you've talked a lot about is that kind of relational one-to-one things of like how we love each other and what does it look like, and Elias's question as well, like what does it look like for me to see the other, to see, you know, when I'm having when I'm in a church environment, how do I welcome people, how do I embrace people, help people to feel included? What do you think about when it comes to structure within the church and representation in church leadership, things like that? Do you think that the role of kind of affirmative action, to use that language, in bringing Black people, people of colour into be represented in leadership, do you think that those two things are like I don't know how to say that word. Do you think those two things work well together? Do you think that you need to have cultural change and relational change before you can do representation well in leadership? Or do you think the one aids the other? I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I think we've been having conversations like this, and I think where we've got to is like why have more representation at the front? Like what difference would it make, really? You know, what difference will it make to us as a church? What difference does it make to us as individuals? And I lean more to making the change that is a heart change than a visual change. So if there isn't diversity in any leadership structure, why and what does that mean? And if the reason is because there isn't diversity in your own lives, and so maybe then the change needs to happen there. Like maybe I need to try to get to know more people that don't look like me or that are not like me, and actually build relationships with those people, because then that, I feel like there's a natural spillover from that, and actually that's more important to me, in my opinion. I do think though that when it's not reflected, it does feel exclusive. Like you do feel there is a sense of exclusion that you might feel in a way that you're not defining in your mind. But I lean more towards the heart change, or if a heart change is needed, I lean more towards that.
Just to quickly say, first of all, I think, Chloe, that is absolutely a fantastic question. It's a really, some ways, a complicated question, but and in some ways not. I think in terms of affirmative action and that sort of thing, so people that don't know, you know, in some quarters, particularly in corporate worlds, it's where you may create a quota to say that maybe 50% of X, Y, and Z roles should be fulfilled by either a woman, if there's low gender representation, or by someone from kind of African-American background or Asian background, if those numbers are low. And truth be told, when you look at the numbers and the facts, actually, affirmative action hasn't got a great track record. It hasn't always done well for the people it's supposed to support and serve. And actually, I don't know if anyone would want to be in a role because not because of their ability or competency, but simply because they need to fill a quota. I don't think anyone would want that. So I think, to all intents and purposes, affirmative action is, you know, it's a bit like Jesus saying to the lawyers that, you know, Moses allowed you to divorce because of your hard hearts, you know, and because of the meanness of your heart. It's kind of a compromise. And so I think that where everything has been tried, I do think affirmative action should be considered where everything else has been tried. But I agree with Bianca's points. I just thought I'd make that small point on affirmative action. could I just make one comment about the concern bit or the offence piece? It's just a very brief one. I was thinking about how does Jesus see offence? And imagine you're at a wedding, and we've got lots of weddings now, thank God, that are now able to sort of happen. But imagine you're at a wedding, and the bride comes along and gets to the front, and everyone's sort of very excited. And then let's say Steve is kind of officiating the wedding, and Steve is about to give the vows, and then the groom turns around and says, "Wait 1 second," and runs out of the wedding, and everyone turns around and thinks, "Where's he gone?" And he goes and decides to make up with someone who had offended him, who wasn't even at the wedding. And this is what Jesus describes, right? Jesus says that if you get to the altar and you've got your sacrifices, put it down. I tell you, put it down and go and make amends in the midst of a ceremonial kind of sacrifice. That's how serious Jesus took offense. And that would be like someone just running out of a wedding. And so I think that it's very right that we're talking about this. God looks at this very seriously, and because God really cares for our hearts, and our well-being is of the utmost importance to the Lord. And so he puts that moral choice, that decision, above any other ritual or cultural kind of event we might be part of.
Wow, that's so good. Lots of food for thought there, guys. Thank you. What we're going to do, we're going to send you into breakout groups for probably about 10 minutes. There might be a countdown which doesn't say 10 minutes, but I'm just going to continue the breakout rooms for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back, and then I've got a little prayer I'd love us to pray afterwards. So we're going to send you into breakout groups. I'm then going to post some these questions for you guys to discuss. What has most impacted you by the thoughts over the last 45 minutes? How have the last few months impacted you in a way that you are seeking to be more compassionate or more inclusive to other people, to the others? And then the last one, if you're willing to do this one, how do we overlook people in our everyday lives? So I'll post those in the comments, but you've got 10 minutes. So be mindful that if you speak for 4 minutes, someone's not able to speak. So let's just be respectful of other people's voices while we share.